Hello, everybody. This is your host, Christian, and today we have Mary. Mary, welcome to the Ledger Show.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
My pleasure. So let's start with an introduction about your role and what you're doing right now.
Yes. So currently I'm product manager at DeliveryHero in the Fintech department, and I'm handling the payments processing team. Mainly figuring out, to make our customers proud internally and also the external customers.
I guess that managing payments at DeliveryHero is a big thing. Like you have so many companies. I don't know if you're following only the German market or.
No, not at all. I mean, in Germany, that's the complex part about it. In Germany, we are not even operating. So it was quite complex to get started or to get onboarded because, we are operating, our DeliveryHero is operating in over 70 countries and serves up to 2.2 billion people. And not operating in Germany was a little bit hard just to understand what's the use cases, how are the users behaving and stuff like that. That's complex not being live in Germany.
You mentioned that you're taking care of building the payment products, but also the internal services.
Exactly. We do have several different parts in fintech. So some things we build internally, but then also, of course, some things we keep externally. It depends on actually the use case of it, and then also, of course, how many countries would use the same feature. How is the product or feature scalable? But that's not only related to DeliveryHero. I think that's general the case if you have that many countries and that many customers that you serve.
Is this related to onboarding payment service provider in every country where you work, where maybe you want to also have local kind of payments?
Yeah, that can be part of it, but it's not only this. It is actually way bigger or goes beyond only the payment service provider. If a company, maybe I just want to add the disclaimer here because the personal opinions that I shared, not all they will not be connected to DeliveryHero. So, in general, if you want to open a department or a separate fintech, I think then you need to think beyond only the payment service providers, because integrating payment service providers is something very basic that other companies do as well without having a separate fintech department. Going beyond means that you might think about specific payment features. So, what about subscriptions, for example? They work way different than a normal purchase when you, I don't know, let's imagine you order a burger, that's a one-time purchase. But if you want to have a subscription, for example, on Spotify or somewhere else, then the payment itself works in a complete different way. And then you might want to think about, do you want to take the opportunity to handle this yourself on your own services, or do you want to keep it out with the payment service provider and let them actually do the logic? So this is an example where we go beyond, or where in general you can go beyond only thinking about the integrating with a payment service provider.
What's your take on this? Because like you just mentioned, you can leave a lot of logic to the payment service provider. To mention Stripe, where you can also have subscription. But then at a certain time, you can start thinking, okay, maybe these kind of features are things that we want to do internally.
Yeah, I think you would have to start in identifying the different use cases and also the different users. So if you feel and also how far are you scaling it, or how globally are you acting? Because if you identify, for example, several hundred use cases and you know that you're operating in, 4 different regions worldwide, then you might see that there is a positive impact on building maybe a platform or services your own, because then you have actually the power about enabling all of these features and adapting it to your either stakeholders or users' needs, because they can vary very much from region to region. But then, of course, you also have to think about the budget, like if you build it on your own. But this is the same with the costs if you buy it. I mean, if you have thousands of different payment service providers worldwide that you would need to integrate based on the user behavior, then the costs, of course, they rise also extremely. So these are actually two points of keeping in mind when deciding of building versus buying. And then, of course, also, you would need to have a vision for the future. I mean, building a service or building something makes sense if you can scale it even further, if you think about the future. So, for example, when Google built Google Pay or Alibaba built Alipay, they all had the vision of becoming a separate entity, maybe, or of becoming like globally very, very important. And I mean, they have come so far. I mean, Alipay, I think, is going to be one of the main sponsors of the Football World Cup or European World Cup in 2024. So yeah, it depends also on the vision that you have, if it makes sense to build something on your own, to actually invest in this.
So how is it going to help the growth of the company in that sense?
If you build it right, then yes. I mean, in the beginning, it will cost you a fortune, I would say. But long term, yes, it will help grow the company. And as said, I think many people know Alipay. Google Pay, I think, is worldwide known, and then the same with Mercado Pay to Mercado Pago, which is also the e-commerce conglomerate, similar to Alibaba and Amazon. And yes, they do make money with it. I mean, it's not a big stake in regards to the usual or to the basic where they're coming from, like the e-commerce industry, but it can grow further if you do it the right way. And also, I mean, you can build trust with your either stakeholders or your customers because you know them for so long, or you have a relationship with them for so long that they will trust you in building these services and in handling payments or any engines that support processing payments.
Okay. So one of the main trade-off between build versus buy is the cost and, like you mentioned, the flexibility. Is there any other thing that like someone is trying to build something internally or consider to build something internally?
Yes, I mean there is the trust with the customers or stakeholders. That is one important point, because if you would want to scale and maybe become maybe you want to give out loans to one of your customer streams at some point, then it is important that you have that trust. And only with the trust you can build something that is then scalable again. Because I think no customer who doesn't have a trust relationship or like a long relationship with such a service or company, they wouldn't make sense to see also as customers for a loan, because you would need to have historical data and all of that. And that you can build by having these internal services.
Okay. It seems like fintech can, on top of the fintech, you can build new use cases for growth, like as you just mentioned, lending. So no, every company is somehow a fintech company.
Yeah, I mean, for some it works out, for some it doesn't work out. And also every company who is creating a fintech, they have different visions. So I remember, I think Auto 1, like also one of the bigger startups back in the days in Germany, they have also built a fintech, but it hasn't been really successful. And I think they also started with giving out loans to car buyers. So it can go also different ways. Like, it doesn't mean that every fintech has to become an own payment service provider in the end. It can go multiple ways. And yeah, for some it will work out, for others maybe it doesn't work out, to see this as a new revenue channel.
I see. I guess another big problem that you have when you're collecting money from so many different countries and you integrate with so many different payment service providers is reconciling all this payment on your side.
Yes. I mean, Yeah, I mean, maybe just to step back, because reconciliation is a complex topic and maybe sometimes also complex for people to understand. So I mean, in the end, it is about matching the transaction report, and there is an acceptable difference. So if you would have an internal service and you would have the power of processing payments or anything, then there is a risk of not having matched the different statuses of a payment or a transaction with what the payment service provider has. I mean, there is an acceptable risk or an acceptable mismatch when you say, okay, maybe the payment service provider, they have already set it as a completed transaction, but the internal service is still processing some other communication because there is another service between this in a different layer. So you would see maybe in the end it will match. So this is an acceptable risk to take. But there can also be issues that you say, okay, actually there are, I don't know, a number of transactions that have been processed, but maybe never paid because of a mismatch in this. So you would actually need to figure out, of course, also with the PSP, but also internally, if that would be like an issue, how you can mitigate these risks. Like what logic would you need to implement so this can be so this doesn't happen anymore in the future.
Okay.
And I mean, also it can be related to business loss. Maybe it doesn't have to be related to business loss, but it's not only about business loss, but reconciliation is actually also a very, very important topic in regards to risk. And also, I mean, if you don't reconcile, if the books don't end up matching in the end, it can also be seen as like cooking the books, so might be fraud. So you would want to make sure that the reconciliation process is working very well.
And in your case, you have both internal services, but also external providers. So I guess in your case, it's even more complex because you need to integrate sources from so many different providers. And the scale.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you would need to have for anything that is built, we try to make it PSP agnostic, so that it is not specific to one PSP. Because as I said, like if you operate in more than 70 countries, you also have actually multiple different integrations that you would use. And in order to not replicate the work for each integration, you would want to have as generic implementations as possible. And so maybe it is a solution, or it might be a solution to, again, like build your own service, your own reconciliation service that then again communicates with all of the PSPs, but in the same way. The PSPs themselves, so the payment service providers, they of course have different ways of communication. It's not the same for each of them. But yeah, on our side, we try to make everything PSP agnostic.
Were you able to buy something on the market for the reconciliation and matching part, or you had to develop something internally for just the complexity of your use case?
I mean, for some use cases, there is a hybrid solution. So we try to build something, but then also, of course, there are some parts that we buy. Yeah, so high level, sometimes we do this hybrid solution for complex things, or even for cost opportunities.
Okay. Like complex use cases that they are super specific to DeliveryHero, something you built internally, and for more general use cases, you take something from the market. What is the matching rate you can get with the reconciliation? Like 99%, or like, what is a good matching rate?
Well, a good matching rate is for sure 99%. Not sure about our exact matching rate to be shared. 99% is something that is almost not possible, like for any e-commerce or any fintech company out there. You would have to identify also actually the fraud and legal risks. So I think based on this and based on the historical data of yours, you would need to find a good KPI that you work towards in order to make it a matchable success rate or matching rate. But for ours, I'm not sure.
Okay. Does it mean that in your case, you also have the finance team or the accounting team as a stakeholders?
Yes, in our case, actually, so the fintech has actually multiple stakeholders, and yes, they are one of them, and we would need to work closely with them. But not only this, but also the stakeholders, they can be our users in the end. Because as a fintech, you might have created also different user interfaces for internal users in order to make their life easier and to understand, okay, which country supports which payment method, and what setup do they have. So do we, for example, capture directly, or do we have a capture delay where we only reserve the money and then capture it? So the stakeholders might be our users, but sometimes also the stakeholders are only our stakeholders. And then we have, again, like the different streams of the real end users. But even the end users, they can vary, because we have riders, we have restaurants, we have vendors who own stores from which we pick up and deliver. And then, of course, we also have the end customers who order something on their phone. But yes, accounting, they are stakeholders.
Like a lot of priorities to be pulled together.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is. And a lot of different like cultures and backgrounds in the sense of the payment industry as well. I think before I went into fintech, I didn't really notice, or I didn't really know that the payment methods and PSPs and requirements and compliance requirements would be that different from region to region. I thought it's like common sense, for example, to have, I don't know, a 3D secure everywhere set up, but actually it's something quite specific for the European region to have it as an additional security layer. And that is also a little bit complex to understand. And then, of course, you would need to serve all of these use cases for the different regions.
Yeah, I probably once heard that payments are political things, like the way in which they are implemented and the way it should work. It's a political thing.
Yeah.
So you operate in so many different countries. You need to support local payments. Usually, like a common thing that I hear is the trade-off between enabling payments, risk, and fraud. How's it going there?
I'm not sure if I would support saying trade-off. I mean, there it also depends on what do you maybe build, what do you buy. In regards to risk and fraud, there have to be risk or fraud rules implemented. Otherwise, you are exposing your services or the ability to find like maybe a lag or some fraudulent behavior. You're exposing it on a risk that can actually be mitigated. There are quite a lot of different machine learning tools out there that you can integrate with, and they would support you or the fintech in general or processing payments in having default rules. So there is specific fraudulent behavior which you can see, like, for example, if a user changes the address multiple times, or also stolen cards. I mean, they are marked somewhere, so you would know that if a card got stolen, it would be marked, and then another transaction with this card would be blocked. So this is common sense for those tools that you can implement. I mean, there can be a trade-off if you say if you say there is an acceptable risk of some of the payments. So, for example, if you offer cash payments, for example, it's quite big in the APAC region to still pay with cash. You have a certain risk because you can't really score the payments, or you can't really score the user and say, okay, this is fraudulent behavior or not, especially if it's a new user. But there is a very high likelihood that when the rider gets to the door with the order, the person might not open the door, and then the food will be wasted. So it is actually a business loss that you have. This can't happen with online payment methods, because there you would first pay, or most of the times you would first pay and then only get the order delivered.
Okay.
So there is a certain trade-off, but yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that you can't have rules for cash. You can actually set up the rules, because if you have customers that have been with you for a long time, then you can say, okay, this is a customer that I trust as a machine learning tool. So there is no risk in them actually selecting cash as a payment method. But yeah, there might be a certain business risk that you are able to take versus risks that you don't want to take, or countries that might have higher fraudulent behavior for certain payment methods.
What's one of the trickiest things you have to work with as a product manager in Fintech?
Sorry, some of the what?
Yeah, what is one of the trickiest things that is taking you a lot of time, or it's taking more time than what you expected?
Take me more time than I would expect to. I mean, alignment, but I think maybe that's not. I don't think it's Fintech specific.
Yeah.
So, but if I take alignment, then actually following a certain product discovery rule, and then making sure that all of the different teams have signed off the solution, because there is like a lot of compliance behind it, a lot of fraud, a lot of other inputs. So yeah, I would say alignment, but also stakeholder management is something that actually takes way more time than I expected it to be. But it's also very fun.
You mentioned you work with a lot of external suppliers, because sometimes the complexity, or just because you want to be cost-wise. Like, is there any suggestion that you would have for vendors or like startup building a solution for fintech companies?
Suggestions. I don't think I can suggest anything, because I'm not very much involved in the partnerships or like in the tools that we buy. So I'm more in detail into internal services. But I mean, there are always opportunities of having partnerships, and I think they shouldn't be underestimated. So if you become big enough, because of course it costs something, but if you become big enough as a fintech, it might even make sense for you to have co-branded cards, because it's something that exposes your brand very well in the market. So co-branded cards would be something that a bank is actually supporting you with by having your logo on the cards that they issue to their customers. And it is actually it's a great marketing exposure. So and at the same time, the merchant, they actually take care of selling also the card. So it would be the company itself, but all of the heavy lifting in regards to all of the rules that are behind this, they still are with the bank. So you don't need to become a bank yourself to issue co-branded cards. So I would say this is maybe something that everyone can take a look at. And I think Zomato did it before, so they had their name branded on RBL bank cards. So yeah, I would always look out on partnerships actually, or not underestimate them.
Okay. Because you mentioned like branded card is like embedded banking something that you're looking into, or embedding like banking functionality inside your fintech team as a provider for?
Embedded banking, not really. I think what is something that many fintechs look into is having their own wallet. So it's uncoupled from embedded banking, but once you want to open up a wallet to use it somewhere else than only in your revenue channel, then it becomes more of a license and a banking question, because to open up this wallet, you would need certain licenses, of course, because you would actually be someone who is becoming a payment processor also outside of their own entity. But no, not really in regards to banking itself.
So having DeliveryHero coins, or
What? Sorry.
having DeliveryHero coins, or
Yeah, exactly.
okay.
Or instead of your PayPal account, you would have a, I don't know, DeliveryHero Food Panda account or something that you can use then for anything else. So if you're at Edeka, maybe you would be able to pay with it.
Like you mentioned, you're working with a lot of PSP providers. Like, what is the main issue that you have with them? Like, do you feel they, generally speaking, it's pretty good working with them, or depending on the country, there are like regional differences?
Yeah, it really much depends on the country. Because for some of the regions and the PSPs, so when you integrate with them from a backend perspective, some of them don't share a lot of information in the API calls or in the APIs themselves. So for us, it's hard to investigate or to identify the real behavior or the real process of the payments with them. And also some of the PSPs, even though they might be big, but some of them, they actually face a lot of internal issues that have an impact on us, because if their servers are down or if they have an incident, it might affect all of their customers or certain customers. So if they should be down for, I don't know, let's say 2 hours or something, then we can't operate with them. So we also actually have a loss with them. And yeah, it happens mainly for smaller PSPs. But yeah, I mean, it also depends on if we want to use them. We know the risk. We have now like also great partnerships with all of them. And yeah, maybe you would want to switch to a bigger one and not offer it. But then maybe it's very, very regional, and maybe the users only know this 2 or 3 payment methods that are only offered by this 1 or 2 PSPs. So that can also be very specific cases.
Okay. So coverage is always important. I mean, offering the best payment method for the customer. Okay.
Yeah, of course. So we always want to offer the customers a seamless experience, and that means also offering actually what is basic to their market. So PayPal, for example, I didn't know that also before, but PayPal is not as big outside of Europe as in Europe. I think they only entered the Latin American market like some years ago. So you would really need to focus on specific regional payment methods. That makes sense.
Okay. I wanted to ask you like a few more questions about the PSP before wrapping up. And more than about the PSP, about like general trends that you see in the fintech area. For example, about PSD2 and open banking, accounts to accounts payment. If it's something that you're currently like checking or.
Yeah, I mean, those 3 topics, they don't really fall under my scope, but in regards to the industry, like what I see oftentimes is actually a heavy focus on BNPL, so buy now, pay later. At the same time, also a heavy focus on stand-in processing, which is similar to BNPL. For BNPL, of course, like you pay in installments that you can decide yourself. And for BNPL, there are also like multiple solutions out in the market. I think many people know Klarna, for example, but then also you would want to maybe integrate also with other PSPs that offer the same. And at some point, you would also want to make the decision on who is actually the ledger in the end, like who is responsible and taking the risk of customers not being able to pay. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to be the ledger from the beginning, but then also it has actually quite some processing costs to have buy now, pay later. So this is actually one of the big bets that I see in the whole industry. And then the other one is stand-in processing. So stand-in processing is actually slightly different because this only happens when, for example, some server or some service is down. Then you would queue up the transactions that couldn't be finalized in the second, but still the user, they would get whatever they ordered. Like the payment would be processed, like from their perspective, but in the back end, you would queue up the transaction or the payment process. And then at the point where the service is running again, then you would process the whole queue. So it might even be in 2 hours that we process the payment or a company process the payment, even though you have already gotten your order or your food 2 hours ago.
Okay, so you're taking the risk.
Exactly, and both vary quite some risks. I mean, depending on which solution you choose, and also where you see the ledger being. But these are like the two main industry things that I currently see, which are having a lot of communication about them.
So they're marketing a lot, I guess.
Yes, babe.
Okay, so Mari, it's time to wrap up. Are you ready for a rapid fire round of questions?
Yes, shoot.
Okay. What is the best piece of professional advice that you have received?
Take more vacation or time off in between jobs.
That's a good one. What book would you recommend to our audience?
Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. It's from Caroline Paris. Very interesting book. Very data-driven.
Okay, great suggestion. What's your main passion outside of work?
I love ideating on very bad existing processes. So every time I'm on a long car ride, I tend to think about mainly governmental processes that could be improved.
Okay. It's like within your team or within your department, or it's...
No, completely out of my professional work. I founded a startup called Find My Kita. It's to improve the Kita process, but I tend to do it all the time for different processes. I once came up with a similar solution as Urban Sports Club, but 7 years ago. So I noted everything down, but I never did it. And then in the end, when Urban Sports was there, I was like, oh, shit, actually they have done what I wanted to do. But I tend to not really pick them up, these ideas, but I note them down.
And the last question, is there anything you're learning right now?
Yes, I'm actually doing quite some coaching. So I learned to be a little bit softer with myself, not be hard on myself.
Okay, that's interesting. It's like mental health professional coach or...
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I totally suggest I'm also doing the same.
Yes, it's amazing.
Okay. So if people want to find out more about DeliveryHero, they can visit the website, deliveryhero.com. And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
LinkedIn, for sure. They can reach out to me directly if they want.
Great. So I'm going to share your LinkedIn profile inside the show notes. And Mari, thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure and wishing you the best.
Thanks a lot for having me.